If everyone can take their seats, please. We're about ready to start. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our release of our report, Learner at the Center of a Networked World. I'm Charlie Firestone, Executive Director of the Aspen Institute Communications and Society Program. The Aspen Institute is a nonpartisan nonprofit aimed at enlightened leadership based on timeless values, and the Communications and Society Program looks at the societal impact of the information and communications technologies. We've been very fortunate to be entrusted by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation to run a task force on learning in the internet with the aim of maximizing the opportunities of the new technologies for all learners. That is, to maintain safety and privacy while allowing more openness and innovation for learning techniques. And secondly, to increase access to the technologies, applications, and content for all learners. The task force that has been working for the last over a year, consists of 20 experts, leaders, great thinkers, as proxies for the various fields that are interested in this, whether it be educators, librarians, technology people, technology companies, parent interests, and so on. So it was a terrific group. It was very diverse, and fortunately they came together for a unanimous report that we're going to issue today. They were led, we have two honorary co-chairs, Governor Jeb Bush of Florida and Rosario Dawson, the actress, activist, and their colleagues were the co-chairs of the task force. Before I introduce them, I'd like to thank a number of people who have worked very hard to make this possible. These include the Swell Creative Group, Philip Holmes and Adam Jacobson, the Penn Hill Group, Danica Petrosius, Kara Marcioni, and Devin Parsons, Richard Adler, who drafted much of the report, and several from my own staff, Tricia Kelly, Rachel Pohl, and Sarah Eppenheimer, most especially. Also Jackie Orwick from the Aspen staff. I'm very pleased to introduce the two co-chairs, and then we have three of the task force members who will explain the report, what it's about, and then we will have a couple of announcements of some follow-up, and finally we will then move to some discussion from those in the audience here and also on our online audience. And we welcome you in the online audience, and we encourage you to tweet and ask questions via our hashtag, which is hashtag Aspen Task Force. Finally, before introducing our co-chairs, I'd like to thank again the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, Julia Stash, their interim president, and Connie Yao, who directs the education sector, and I see An-Mei Chung, who also at one time worked there and now works for Mozilla. We'll hear from her a little bit later, but also for all your help in making this possible. So the essence of this report is, as we say, learner at the center of a networked world. It was a vision that the group came together to see. They didn't start out that way, but that's where it went. And from that came a number of principles and a number of action steps that the task force is recommending. To set that out, I'm pleased to introduce first John Bailey. John Bailey has worked with Jeb Bush in his Foundation for Excellence in Education, where he's the senior vice president and also the executive director of Digital Learning Now. He has a background in educational technology, having been the first director of educational technology at the state of Pennsylvania, and has worked in the, was a special assistant to President George W. Bush, and has had other positions in the U.S. government and also at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and at some other places. And let me, before you speak, let me also introduce your co-chair, Maria Teresa Kumar, who is founding president and CEO of Voto Latino, where she works with Rosario Dawson, our other honorary co-chair. Voto Latino is a great organization that is all about inclusiveness and access. Maria Teresa is also a contributor to MSNBC and a number of other publications and outlets. In addition to this baby that we have produced, she produced her own in that year. She produced one of her own.
That's a test of how long it's been, right?
Yeah.
Work.
When Walter Isaacson first came here, he talked about what was the time frame that we had at the Aspen Institute. And I said it was gestational. It took about 9 months for us to start a project and come to fruition. This one took a little longer, but it's worth it. So John Bailey will start us off with describing where we are on this report. You can do that, or you can speak to this one.
Yeah, maybe I'll just use the podium. Thanks, it's great to be with you today. Thanks so much for coming out on a hot, humid DC day. I want to just echo Charlie's thanks to Connie and the MacArthur Foundation for sponsoring this, to the Penn Hill Group for helping to staff this and to do some of the outreach to a lot of organizations, many of who are in this room. Also want to thank the Aspen staff, so Charlie and Tricia and Rachel, just to name a few of the army of folks that kind of helped corral us and help staff us and keep us focused over this last year. I also want to just thank not just my co-chair, Maria Teresa, but the commissioners as well. It is a really diverse group of individuals from all sorts of different experiences, from the tech sector, from the business sector, nonprofit, from education. We had a superintendent with us, a librarian, as well as public policy officials, bipartisan, and we wrestled with a lot of challenging questions that we'll talk about today. What kind of learning is possible today thanks to new opportunities that are enabled by technology and connectivity? How do we balance education opportunities with privacy and security? This is a real tension, something Charlie helped tee up for us, but always a tension between openness to education opportunities and total sort of protected private and secure environments there. And how do we build trust with parents, students, and teachers that data is being used appropriately and that it's safe and secure? One of the defining issues, I think, of the coming year here. And what challenges are created by a legacy system that needs to be modernized? A lot of legacy regulations, a lot of legacy laws that sort of enter into conflict and create new tensions and new challenges as a result of this sort of new modern next generation system of learning that we want to explore and that we're challenging all of you to help us explore. I also want to acknowledge that, as often is the case, a lot of task force often sort of meet and they announce recommendations, and there's just a sense of like, this is all new. And we want to acknowledge, I think all the task force members, that we're building on the existing work in advocacy and research by a number of different groups out there. It's part of the reason we did such a large outreach. But I just want to acknowledge some of the folks in this room whose work that we're building on and want to recognize and really want to echo and amplify and help advance. But Doug Levin at the State Education Technology Directors Association is sort of a critical advocacy group that's really working to modernize state policy. Governor Bob Wise has been a partner, a friend, and an advocate for many of us in the room, and a huge champion of digital learning and helping to really open up these education opportunities for students around the country. And many of you, public and private corporations and partners in this room, we want to build on your work and help accelerate it, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Before we sort of dive into the specifics of the report, I just want to sort of comment on 3 things that really struck us and struck our conversations about the task force recommendations with Governor Bush. The first is, and we'll talk more about this, but this whole issue of access. And often in connected learning, we define access solely by broadband. But it is really sort of access in terms of the education opportunities that broadband enables and provides. Meaning you can have super fast broadband connectivity, but still have shut off education access to different types of education experiences and opportunities, whether it's online courses or online materials. We'll talk more about that, but this is a huge, huge challenge and a huge opportunity as well. And it comes at a very important time when the FCC is considering some really important reforms to simplifying, modernizing, and strengthening the E-rate program. And so we're very encouraged by that. We had 3 former FCC commissioners as part of our task force, and think the work the FCC is kicking off there is incredibly important. Second, we're going to talk a little bit about the notion of competency-based learning, which is something that shouldn't sound foreign, but it really is sort of a new model of education where right now we have a lot of students that get credit based on the amount of time they spend in class, not based on when they can demonstrate the mastery of learning. In our sort of vision of this connected learning, we want students to be able to earn credit and advance to the next level as soon as they can demonstrate that mastery. And that's a radically sort of new notion in our education system. It's going to require a lot of modernizing legacy laws, the way we certify teachers, the way we gauge teacher effectiveness, the way we hold schools accountable, the way we think about standards and assessments. It's going to require new credentials and badging. If it's true, what you learn is more important than where you go, then we need a whole new system that can recognize student learning that may happen online and from other institutions outside of education in terms of outside of schools. And then finally, this whole notion of building trust. That data privacy is just a very major issue for us as a country right now in retail as well as with national security, and it's a debate we're having in education. And we want to sort of introduce this whole notion of how do we build trust amongst parents, amongst students, amongst education providers, and amongst students to help guide these learning networks. And we'll talk more about that in some of the recommendations, but this is just going to be a critical element for us to be really thoughtful as we engage in this conversation in public policy in particular at the state level, but also here at the federal level, that trust should come with a lot of, parents should know that their child's information is safe, it's secure, it's protected, and it's being used appropriately by sort of people that are empowered in their connected learning community. This tension is only going to grow, and so we have to tackle it head on, and we have some specific recommendations there too. First, before we dive into the recommendations, I just want to call up now my co-chair, Maria Teresa, who's been just fantastic and did give birth to two babies as part of this. So, Maria Teresa.
I think it's a different type of, actually, I know that everyone's time is short, so I want to honor that, but I do want to recognize Connie Yao with the MacArthur Foundation and Charlie for putting this together, and more importantly, you forced us to walk the talk. So we're talking about internet learning, we're talking about connected learning. Not only did we bring in traditional stakeholders, yes, we brought in business, yes, we brought in government, and we brought in nonprofit, but you opened up the process to the American public so that they can have a conversation with what they believed defined connected learning. And I think that's one of the beauties about this report is that it's not only the importance of saying how do we move forward, but recognizing that any type of recommendations that we do moving forward has to have a conversation that is not just in Washington, but that is across the nation. And with that, I'd love to continue the conversation. So thank you so much, you guys, also for taking the afternoon with us.
Let me just mention that there are basically 5 approaches or areas of this report. The first is that learners at the center of learning networks, that the learning networks don't stop at the classroom walls, that the learner doesn't stop with learning within schools, but rather it's schools, homes, online, museums, libraries, after-school programs, whatever. So we have a great graphic in the report, which I will also hold up for the television audience and find the graphic, that shows the student truly at the center. Schools have talked about that. Teachers have talked about that. We know that there are many teachers who do put the student at the center. But this is, we're at a new age where the connectivity allows that to happen at a whole different level. And that is and has to happen. Then the 4 pillars out of that start with certainly access, and both our co-chairs have talked about access. It's not just access to schools, not just access to classrooms, but broadband to the student. And the student needs to have access to not only connectivity, but to the content as well. And then an area of interoperability, which is that when we have the credentialing and all the other aspects of this, that these different systems need to be interoperable. You have to be able to go, they can't be in silos, you have to go from one to the other. And I think John introduced, probably not originally, but data backpacks as a concept, and I think that's a good way to think about it. And then we go to digital literacy, which is a actually we call it digital age literacies, which is not only digital literacy and media literacy, but also social emotional literacy, and that these are literacies that can not only help people learn, but also protect them when we get to the trust issue. And finally, the area, but not least, is the area of a trusted environment. Rather than look at this as a fear-based society, which a lot of our activities are aimed at fear, and we don't try to minimize the dangers, but we like to think of how do we come together to create trusted environments. No one wants to send anybody to an unsafe or an unprivate area, but we also want to take advantage of the opportunities. We don't want to have such over-filtering that students and learners don't have an opportunity to take advantage of these opportunities. So to expand on the last 3 points on the interoperability, we've asked Kathy Casserly, who has just left as CEO of Creative Commons, has a background in open educational resources from the Hewlett Foundation, and has a doctorate in economics of education. And I will jump the gun a little bit and say that Kathy will be, as of July 1st, she's coming on as a fellow at the Aspen Institute Communications and Society program to help follow up this activity. Kathy?
Great, thank you. So I've been asked to speak about the point in the report around interoperability in particular. And so let me first begin by saying that there was common agreement that it wasn't a great word. People were like, interoperability, too big a word, what does it really mean? And while we didn't have any agreement on the term, we did have agreement on its importance. And so as a result, because we couldn't think of another way to describe the systemic effect that we need, and interoperability is really the word that captures it, we all agreed to the word of interoperability. I should also say that we also wanted to name Maria Teresa's child, and we thought trust would be a good name, but that was nixed as well. But so when we talk about interoperability, I just want to talk about it in a larger frame and then talk about the specifics of the reports and the recommendations and why it's so important. So really, we need to think about how in practice we weave the strands of interconnectivity. So right now, learners go in many different places to achieve their learning, and there isn't a systematic way for both that learning to be recognized and for the data from that learning to come together for the individual and to follow that individual on in their life, as well as where we find these assets of learning. And because of it, it's not a learner-centric design. The system we have is not at all focused on the end product of what we're all trying to create, which is great outcomes for the students, no matter where you are in your learning system. And so we've created these systems, and part of it was created because that's what made sense in the day of the industrial era, but we're now in the information era, and so now we have to create a new system that will interoperate, right? And these tech systems have to revolve around the learner, which is really important, and it has to can't have friction. There can't be friction every different place the learner turns, and there can't be all this energy that's expended just trying to get into the learning system and to achieve their learning objectives. So it has to be fluid, and it has to be open for the learner. And if we think about the current systems that we have for kids, that we have for students, that we have for adult learners, that isn't what exists now. So we have to recreate, and we have to think hard about how we create this ecosystem and infrastructure. So this is a technology challenge. It's a bit of a technology challenge about how data flows and how information flows. But I also really want to point out it's also a human and an institutional challenge. It's a cultural challenge. And at every level, we have to address flows among institutions, among individuals, and among data systems, but we also have to address it vertically. So it's a very complicated system. We know education's a very complicated system, and what we do is have to kind of create this very simple infrastructure that kind of hides in the background and makes it easy for the learner as they move throughout their learning journey. To solve this, we really need to optimize the complex system of learning. And when we think about it, and when we described it in the report, it's any time, any place, any pace. So how do we create a system that makes sure that can happen? And we have to think about it under the umbrella for learning. Both learners want to be able to access learning resources very easily. If I want to look up X or learn more about Y, how do I find the learning assets that are really valuable to me? And do I have to go through to a system that won't then allow me to actually transfer to another system that I use for my colleagues or those who I am energized in learning with. How do we think about across the networked world? How do we think about that learning overall? And then if I'm a learner and I receive credit, how do I get recognized for my credit here, over here, in this next step that I want to take in my personal journey? So we have to think about that whole system. So what we've come out is a recommendation around interoperability, which reads as follows: support the maximum feasible degree of interoperability across the learning networks. And to do that, we came up with 2 action steps that I think that are implementable, but we have to think about them as we think about the community of learners and systems. The first one is about adopting open standards and protocols that promote interoperability of learning resources. So what does that mean? For one thing, that means that learning has to be, the learning assets have to be findable, searchable, discoverable. We have metadata. This is a new promise of the digital age. There's metadata that we can tie to assets. We can tag the learning assets, which make the learner be able to discover those assets really easily. So one thing that can happen is that people can follow these open protocols. The developers can follow the protocols and actually just tag the learning assets according to a very standard protocol. And if we all do it, it would simplify this process in a great degree. Another example is the data backpack. Who owns my student data? Who owns my data? Just like a patient's health record, who owns it now? How do I actually simulate it on my learning journey and carry it with me so it's very portable? And how do we create the data systems to make sure we can communicate and make that happen? The second action step is really around conditions of funding. There's a lot of money that pours into the education system in many different ways. There's money that pours into developing networks, platforms, educational assets, resources that get developed. But as a condition of funding, let's require developers of learning platform and learning resources to make provisions for interoperability so that the content and materials don't sit in isolated silos, that they can actually be reused, repurposed, and built upon, that we don't always have to start from scratch. We have a lot in the current system that has been developed that is very strong. Let's share it. Let's get it out to other teachers. Let other people use it and reuse it and revise it as makes sense. So we really want to require the use of open standards that promote sharing and particularly focus on creating mechanisms that enable that sharing. So in the end, we really want to encourage student connectivity, collaboration. We want them to pursue their ideas and share their ideas with their colleagues and friends. We want to really maximize the value. So there's a lot of resources. We have a finite number of resources in this country. Let's use them to really be most efficient as possible. And while interoperability is a bit of a mouthful of word, that's the systematic structure that will allow it to happen.
Great. So then moving on to the digital age literacies, I'm pleased to introduce the blogger of dashes.com, the co-founder of the consulting firm Activate and founder of ThinkUp, a columnist for Wired Magazine, advisor to many institutions, and my favorite line, maybe you were going to say it, but I love it, is he's the first in his family not to go to college. Anil Dash.
Heck of an intro in this room for this topic. The concept of digital literacies, as discussed in this report, I think exemplifies what was great about the task force's approach to almost every conversation, every topic that we discussed, which is not looking for a false simplicity. Right? It's very easy to rubber stamp, well, students ought to be digitally literate and sort of move on from there. And that tendency towards platitudes is especially pronounced when you have a diverse group of people working on a very complex project. And we were able to resist that, I think, as a testament to the leadership that this task force had. And nowhere is that better exemplified in the report than when you look at the recommendations around the digital age literacy. So of course there is the bedrock digital literacy. Students ought to be able to use apps and a web browser and be able to get on the internet and be able to use the basic tools. That's bedrock, that's not controversial. That's the starting point. And then it gets much more interesting and much more varied and rich in the recommendations. One of the great examples of that is moving immediately beyond basic digital literacy as we're familiar with it, and into, to John's point, a lot of reference to what's come before and how to synthesize these into a holistic system. So one of the first examples of that is media literacies. And this can cover a very, very broad range of topics, but we think about everything from intellectual property rights and copyright and how kids can share and great materials to fair use and on into understanding media creation, understanding the economics behind it, understanding what information is trustworthy, how to evaluate trustworthiness of information, especially in an internet context where they might not have the familiar cues and the things they're used to seeing in more conventional forms of media. And then we get into the entire realm of the social and emotional literacies, which are incredibly powerful, and probably one of the most striking and strongest recommendations in the report around this area is to integrate the sort of red flag issues that come up around these social literacies of sexting and cyberbullying, these things, into overall risk prevention programs. So instead of over here is cyberbullying and back here it's a conventional bullying issue, saying, well, if we're not surrounding this issue completely and treating it holistically, we're not solving it at all. And so this is a great area where the recommendation is not go over here and make a digital strategy for dealing with this literacy. It's saying, let's upgrade our programs across the board to encompass these digital considerations. And these are the kinds of things that, one, obviously are going to be much more likely to be successful. They're not disjointed. They are putting that learner at the center. But the form that they take, almost a checklist that a community can have as leading a conversation about these literacies, lets them know they've thought of everything, as opposed to after the fact saying, well, you know, we covered all these issues around literacy and reputation, and we forgot to talk about your future reputation if those photos you shared get shared again in the future that you thought were private. That's the sort of thing that you can have a lot of confidence and trust in the environment when you've got literacies that are in that checklist format for people to follow. So that's one of the most probably innovative parts of the report. One of the things that's going to be most striking as these are put into place by the various institutions that are going to be reading the report.
Great. And now to round out the report, we're very fortunate to have the commissioner really held our feet to the fire for the children, represented one of the task force members who represented, I think, the parent community. She's a former commissioner of the Federal Communications Commission, then known, she was at that time known as the Children's Commissioner, as a special envoy to the ITU for Child Online Protection, and she's an advisory board member to many organizations that address children's, women's, and privacy issues. Deborah Taylor-Tate.
Thanks, Charlie. So I remember the day that Charlie called me. I bet you don't, because you make these calls all the time. And I said, I don't want this to just be another one of those Aspen reports that I get in the mail and we all put on our bookshelf. I want this to be about doing something. And I want to thank Connie and MacArthur, because she didn't just write a check, she walked with us every single step of the way over the past year. And this reminded me, Benjamin Franklin said there are three kinds of people. They're immovable, movable, and people who move. So we are hoping that all of you all are going to help us keep this movement going. And I think in a few minutes you're going to hear some of the entities who have already stepped up to make commitments to move this report out into the real world, which I'm very excited about. And so we've all kind of been on the edges of this, but you know, our children today are doing things that we didn't even have vocabulary words for. Chat, Snapchat, Google, Skype, you know, all those words, they share, they collaborate, they synthesize, compare, publish, which is what Anil was talking about. But they have to have a trusted environment in order for them to be successful in this new intellectual economy that Kathy was talking about. Obviously, we've touched on the fact that while the internet has changed every sector, every industry, our classrooms look almost the same as they did a century ago or even longer, when they were set up for the jobs of yesterday instead of the jobs for tomorrow. Obviously, every student, every parent, every family, every teacher, every educator, all of us want them to live in a trusted environment online. And not that we also don't recognize that there are some very serious dangers out there. But I wanted to reiterate again that this is all about having the child at the center and meeting the child where the learner is. So in the report, we talk about 5 principles that basically undergird the trusted environment. Transparency and openness, participation, which is what we're all doing, data stewardship, technology innovation, accountability, oversight, and enforcement. And just to give you a few examples, so Kathy's kind of talked a little bit about what some of the policies might be about backpacks. A written policy that every school in this country would have regarding data. For those of you all who have children, do you have any idea what your particular school's policies are, or what your state law says, or for that matter, what a code of conduct might look like? Whether or not there are parents involved in setting those local policies, whether it's through a nonprofit. I see Stephen is here with FOSI, Common Sense Media, whether parents are participating in coming up with some of those codes. And then, of course, the usefulness of the data. We want to have all this metadata in order to see how we can individualize learning. What are the best practices? And then, of course, like every other code or regulation that there has got to be some type of accountability, some type of enforcement. So therefore, we also ask questions about that. One of the things that I suggested was, like, instead of the 3 R's, there would be the 3 D's as it relates to children or student or learners' data. Delimiting, so the data is only used for educational purposes. De-identification, so that any of the very personalized, highly sensitive information that, of course, schools may have about kids or learners is removed if that data is going to be transferred or used for something else. And then, of course, the last one in that is deleting after it's no longer necessary for educational purposes. Or, like Kathy gave the example of, an educational electronic record, like medical electronic records that might travel with the child. So after the child leaves the school, for instance, that information would be deleted or moved with the child, as it should. So obviously, as we move into this innovation intellectual economy, we want to be able to prepare our children. And that is so that the software is inside their brains, not merely on their iPad or their laptop or their iPhone, because we want them indeed to gain all the possibilities of this new world and prosperity in the online world, which is their very real world 24/7. Thank you.
Great. So let me then just reiterate the 6 principles that the group came up with. They also came up with 26 action steps, which I'm not going to announce. But just to recap, learners need to be at the center of learning networks. So recommendation 1 was redesign learning environments to empower learners to learn anytime, any place, and at any pace, both in school and beyond. And then the second recommendation under this learner at the center is enhance the ability of educators to support and guide learners in a network learning environment. So we're looking at the importance of the teachers, not trying to minimize the importance of the teachers. Second, every student should have access to learning networks, and the recommendation is build an infrastructure that will connect all students in all places they learn. That's the point, not just the classroom, but wherever, getting the student access to the content as well as the network. The third principle is learning networks need to be interoperable, as Kathy explained, and she, I think, mentioned the supporting the maximum feasible degree of interoperability across learning networks. Then we said all learners should have the literacies necessary to utilize media as well as safeguard themselves in the digital age. And I think one of the important points there is that the literacies can help protect as well as help enhance your learning abilities. And the recommendation is to adopt policies to incorporate digital media and social emotional literacies as basic skills for living and learning in the digital age. And finally, students should have safe and trusted environments for learning. And the recommendation is create trusted environments for learning. So that doesn't say that much, but the action steps go into ways that communities can come together and address that. So with that, we encourage everybody to read the report, at least read the summary, get into these action steps, and follow up some of the action steps. And what we're going to do is have a couple of announcements. Starting, Anil, you're going to announce one action that's already being announced today.
Yeah, absolutely. As we said, the goal of this report is to get action happening in substantive and meaningful ways. It's already starting to happen. We're going to hear a lot of these examples. One of the most exciting ones is the Digital Media and Learning competition, which for the past 5 years has had very successful competitions driving innovation in the areas of digital media and learning. And so Haystack and MacArthur have come together once more to do the competition again, this time focused specifically on a trust challenge. And there's $1.2 million that have been pledged in the form of year-long development grants that range up to $150,000 in value. And these are going to drive innovation and contributions from everybody from independent app developers to libraries to schools to nonprofit organizations, all being able to come up with innovations that are going to drive trust in the environment. And this can be expressed however they think is the most appropriate and effective way to communicate the importance as well as the future development of trust for the students. So this is something that's really, really exciting. It's a really meaningful commitment for Haystack and MacArthur to have made. And it's the perfect encapsulation of how we move from the sort of theoretical conversation around these recommendations into things that are going to be put into place in a pragmatic way. And we're talking about an internet speed timeline on this, right? We're talking about the announcement today, proposals happening this fall, public voting happening in December, and this thing becoming tangible and having results in 2015. That's an incredibly fast timeline. So it's something that's incredibly exciting. I think if you know the history of what the Digital Media and Learning Competition has done, recognizing that they're focused entirely on a trust challenge for the rest of this year is incredibly exciting.
So Maria Teresa said we walk the walk. The MacArthur Foundation, we are very grateful to for putting some dollars behind a significant challenge where everybody can enter and find solutions to some of these vexing problems that have been discussed. We also want to thank MacArthur for following up this activity with a follow-up grant to our program to follow up the work of the task force for another 1.5 years. And as part of that, I just already jumped the gun, but Kathy Casserly will be a fellow at the Institute to work on that and follow what's going on and write about it and perhaps convene some activities. Mozilla, the people here have packets that include statements from some companies. And I thought maybe Ann Mei Chung from Mozilla might, do you want to just give a couple of minutes on, do you want to come up here? I think that would be better.
Would that be better?
Yeah. And then while she's doing that, maybe Brooke Overwater would also come forward.
Hi, I'm Ann Mei Chung with the Mozilla Foundation, and I just want to say on behalf of Mozilla and Mark Sherman, who is our executive director and couldn't be here today, that want to thank you all, MacArthur and Connie and Charlie and the task force, because it was an honor and privilege to be part of this task force. And for me personally, I've been lucky to have been part of this process from MacArthur to Mozilla all along, and it's been an inspiration to be part of this. So thank you guys very much for this. So Mozilla, as most of you know, is best known for Firefox, right? Everyone knows that? Mm-hmm. Okay. And how many of you know that we're actually a nonprofit organization? Right, so half the room does, which is better than it has been, so it's good. But we are a nonprofit public charity, and our primary goal is very much what this task force report has been about. It is about creating an opportunity for web literacy across the globe, and we are really committed to the mission of creating this open, safe, and innovative internet and supporting it through all the work that we do globally. And our goal is to really empower individuals and create communities of opportunity to be able to do that. And a lot of the ways we do that is building open source tools to do that. And one of the things that we are privileged to do, and part of the action steps, is that we will be offering web literacy badges. We have a web literacy map that has 15 competencies on it, and our goal is to ensure that everybody has web literacy as their 4th R. So we are supporting and announcing today that Mozilla, who is content agnostic around badges except for web literacy badges. So it is part of our action steps that were listed. The other thing I want to challenge the other task force members to do is we are going to add to the action steps, so I hope everybody does that too. So this is just the beginning of where we're going to take this report. So thank you.
Let me just say that's a great point, which is these are just beginnings. These are action steps that we came up with behind those principles and those recommendations. But I know maybe John a little later might want to talk about one of the action steps that you wanted to add yourself, and everybody should just take this as a starting point. Speaking of that, let's hear from Brooke Oberwetter, who's representing Facebook.
Thank you so much. Those of you who got handouts when you came in, a list of Facebook's commitment to the action steps is listed in there along with some of the other companies. But I just want to focus on 3 of the things that you'll find in this handout. The first is that we actually see on Facebook, and a lot of people don't tend to think Facebook and learning go together, but one of the things that we see is that when teachers take the classroom online and take it out of the classroom and give opportunities for engagement, they actually see some students who aren't necessarily going to be the ones who are sitting in the front of the class or raising their hand, really engaging very well in these online groups. So we have a little bit of information in this handout that I won't go into too much detail on about how that kind of social dynamic can help encourage students who are otherwise not likely to participate or not likely to engage to get a little bit more involved. So that's the first thing I wanted to highlight about Facebook and education. The second thing is that Facebook is, as all of you know, a platform for third-party organizations to actually distribute their content. So we see a lot of education companies, the Khan Academy, for example, massive online open classrooms using Facebook as distribution channels. So that's another way that Facebook is being used for learning, and it's a way that we're committed to helping those companies continue to build upon so that they can reach more learners. But the third thing that I want to talk about, which has been hit on, I think, a couple times today by almost everybody, is the idea of trust and safety online, and the idea that there is a lot of fear about a lot of obstacles that might exist to learning using Facebook or anything online for educational purposes. We at Facebook work really hard to sort of combat that narrative of fear online, and we have some cutting-edge tools and resources that I think are pretty industry-leading when it comes to safety and security. We can build all of these great systems and we can build all of these great education platforms, but if people don't feel safe and secure when they're using them, they're not going to use them. And that, at the end of the day, is our job as internet companies to make sure that privacy, that data security, that all of those things are being taken care of. So just to mention really quickly, when in the context of students, some of our safety resources, our Family Safety Center is a place where teachers, students, parents, law enforcement, anyone can go to learn about how to stay safe on Facebook, especially when you're using, for example, one of these third-party applications that's distributing content. And we also have a lot of programming related to online bullying and harassment, suicide prevention, and other issues that are definitely facing today's students. So those are just a couple of the things. Again, you have the handout that has all of our commitments on it. Thank you very much.
Well, that's terrific. We should also mention that Google has a handout for those who are here, and also Microsoft, who participated in this, is also taking actions. We just don't have the actual announcements today. I thought we now have about 15 minutes to have questions from the audience, as again, citing Maria Teresa, who I try to cite as much as I can, that we walk the walk. We may start with an online question because we've had a few. If I can find mine. Here they are. And from Marnie, who works with child development students at a community college. She says, how does your report help ensure equal access to digital resources for all families, hardware, internet access in the home, etc.? Anybody want to take that on? Anil?
Yeah, I think there's actually, it was one of the most common refrains in all the conversations that came up is about all the different aspects of access. And one of the things that came out very quickly was, particularly in a school environment, bring your own device versus devices being purchased by a school district. And what we did is we said, both of these scenarios are going to happen. We're not going to advocate one is the right way or the wrong way. But what we can do is provide a framework that works regardless of which of those choices has been made. So in a school district where it's decided that providing devices is going to provide a common baseline that's useful, well, what are the ways you can ensure that those are, that provide equitable access to everyone? And one of the things that quickly came out of that was realizing there are many, many school environments where a student, for example, has access to broadband speed connection, but a YouTube or a Facebook or these other services are blocked. So what good is a broadband connection if they can't watch a Khan Academy video on YouTube? And these are the kinds of questions that come up when you have these sort of deeper conversations about this. And so what we've done, obviously the report on its own cannot address this issue for a family. But hopefully what we can do is give you a toolkit to take to the educators and the people in the community that are responsible for making these decisions to say, are all these considerations that we have these been answered? Have we provided a good answer to all these things? And if we have, at least we're most of the way towards addressing this. And there is almost no one who's saying, I want to exclude families. There's no one saying, I want to leave someone behind. What happens is those things happen as a matter of accident because there isn't a systematic and rigorous way of looking at these things. And we're going to say we're completely comprehensive here, but we'll get you a lot further down the road. And you can add on the items that are the other considerations, particularly to your environment.
And I think to underscore that, we also, when we were talking about digital literacies, we recognized that it was important, yes, the child to have these literacies and the teacher to have these literacies, but increasingly it's very important to have these conversations with the parents. So part of the report's recommendation is how do we actually have parent involvement, because oftentimes they're the ones that are preventing their child from exploring online for their own fear. So we addressed that, we did address that head on.
There's also, just to build on this whole notion of access that, I think in a connected learning environment, folks think of access as just sort of broadband connectivity, and that's a critical part. We singled out the E-rate program, but the E-rate program is sort of necessary but just insufficient for the total amount of connectivity that we need to provide. That if you really are truly committed to a networked environment of access to education opportunities both in school and out of school, you need anytime, anywhere learning, and that means a lot of connectivity outside of the school. And E-rate's very much an institutional base for schools and for libraries, but we raised some questions about how are we going to solve the connectivity challenge to homes, how are we going to solve the connectivity challenges to other education systems. Mobile connectivity is going to become even more important here. And then as Anil was saying too, it's not just the broadband connectivity, it's also what you have access to. And that's a huge challenge, that right now we have schools for a variety of reasons are setting policies that really, they have broadband connectivity, they have internet connectivity, but they're preventing access to some of the education opportunities out there. And there's a lot of challenges too. Anil mentioned bring your own devices. One of the things we wrestled with is what happens when students start bringing their own learning to school? What happens if after this summer students show up having taken a MOOC course at Stanford, at Harvard, at another institution? How is the school going to recognize that? That's why badging that Mozilla is talking about, it's the competency-based learning that we talk about and tee up in this report is going to be so critical because we need to recognize that learning, we need to credential it, and we need to make sure that it's shared with all the different teachers and learning institutions and that students connected learning.
Let me give a little shout out to the Family Online Safety Institute who pushed the parent point to us and also the digital citizenship issues. So are there questions in this audience? Then I'll go online again. Oh, Family Online Safety Institute. It's like back when I was in law school, I could call on somebody.
Thanks, Charlie. Stephen Balcom with FOSI. So during the time of your work, we had the In-Bloom collapse, which was all about student data privacy and parental activists wanting it shut down. So what lessons did you take from what happened there in terms of reaching out to parents, but also calming down regulators and legislators, because there's been a lot of new legislation been drafted, both at the federal level and the state level since that?
John.
Sure. So, I think actually all of us in the education community, the technology community are still sort of processing lessons learned from In Bloom, but I think there's a couple things. Like we think it comes back to this whole notion of trust, that again there was sort of a lack of trust in not just In Bloom as a system, but again in the system of education and how data was being used who it was being shared with, and was it going to be used appropriately. InBloom being a facilitator of that. And I think those are tensions we're seeing that are totally separate from InBloom. InBloom was just sort of the lightning rod for it. But this is going to be the big challenge, and I think this is the reason we mention electronic medical records, and we mentioned in the report, and we'll talk more about that. But if you think about it, the healthcare system, very sort of distributed. You have specialists, you have general care practitioners, you have hospitals, but you want all that to be connected. And the healthcare community has been able to sort of solve through privacy and through electronic medical records the sense of, again, you want those records shared in order to have the best healthcare possible. We need to sort of bring that same sort of methodology and framework into the education debate, and also the same sort of privacy conversations. But right now we don't have that, right? If you called your doctor, you can get your electronic medical record within a day. If you as a parent called your school and said, I want my child's education record, there actually doesn't sort of exist one central education record. There's lots of records, and that's the problem. Like, we haven't sort of really conceptualized it the same way that we have in healthcare and other institutions. And so I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done. One of the reasons we talk about trust is transparency, is that parents really need to know what data is being collected and used, and how it's being used, and who it's being shared with. In absence of that transparency, it allows for a lot of fear, particularly against the backdrop of a lot of other sort of data breaches that are occurring in all their facets of life. So we think their concerns are very legitimate. We're very concerned at the same way that you were just mentioning, that there's a lot of knee-jerk reaction from state legislators, wanting with the best of intentions to do good things, but in the process of, again, trying to protect student data, could actually be shutting off opportunities for kids. And we have to figure out how to balance that with them.
Yeah, as a technologist, having skepticism about sort of technology solutionism for these complex problems is great. We want parents to be saying, I'm not so sure about this. The question that arises is, say, well, okay, do you have a checklist of what InBloom could have checked off to make you feel safe? And I don't think there's anybody that feels confident. They say, well, if you addressed all these things on this list, then I would say I can trust you. And this is the thing we want to move toward, is where there's an affirmative answer, a positive answer, to be able to say, we know there has to be this environment that's connected together. We know the information needs to be shared. We know technology is going to be part of the solution. But what are the boundaries within which we must live? We haven't been able to have a sort of an informed conversation where we're all starting from a common standpoint. That's the kind of thing we can help with.
And I might just add, these are huge challenges across the education system. So who has the right answer? Who has the authority to drive the right answer forward? How do we, it's a very complicated system. So part of this very diverse task force is trying to get really a very diverse group, as we talked about it, at the table to some common agreement, and to say, this is what we agree on right now. It doesn't mean we won't change or iterate, but what we need now is to engage the broader community, because we can only solve these issues of trust and privacy and data sharing and interoperability collectively. And
it's important to start the conversation.
And it's important to be transparent in the conversation.
Yeah,
So
one
I
of the
just comment
anecdotes that came out during the conversations in the task force was in 2012, there were 700 laws passed at the state and local level about privacy and data sharing in the classrooms, right? And you know, what came out talking about that was, are there 700 experts on this topic in the country? Probably not. And so there's no way that we've had an informed conversation for every one of these regulatory conversations, let alone the fact that they're increasing. And so this is the sort of thing where a little bit more information sort of brings everybody up to speed can help a lot.
So I'm not a member of the task force, but I do want to just do one little caution, and that is that I have been involved in some privacy discussions in areas where some people have raised problems with health records. So I just want to clarify that when you say health records, it's not the vulnerable part of health records. It's health records as we see it should be and as intended by the legislation. But some of it has been, you know, it is under criticism, and I just wanted to clarify.
It may be also that it's a little further down the conversational pike than where we are in education. So there's no one that solved the privacy challenge, I think, in any sector, right? This is a constant challenge as technology evolves and as use scenarios evolve too. And so, you know, even if we solved it today in education, there's going to be a new technology innovation next year that will sort of bring new tensions to this. This is going to be an ongoing discussion and debate.
Good. Another question? Yes. And we've got a mic. We'll give you a mic. And identify yourself.
Diana Lady Dugan, serial failure at retirement.
No.
I started in the technology industry about 50 years ago, and like Charlie, not only did I drink the Kool-Aid, I helped to make it in various contexts, including, among other things, helping to establish the schools online before Vice President Gore invented the internet. And I can't speed read, but I can see there's so many wonderful things in here that probably, if it's not here, you've had discussions about. One, of course, is when you come up with a name like learner, you probably had another debates about what about the non-learner, what about the ones who need to be inspired and invigorated and have different forms of learning. The second one is, I don't want to use the word curator, but we do need more discerning abilities among what is truth, not just what is a trustworthy environment, but trustworthy information. And I suspect that's a second element. But the one admonition I would just toss into the pot, and that is there are so many laws and regulations already on the books that can be applied to the internet and virtual environment that I would hope that you would spend more time or not get seduced into spending so much time about regulations, and but reference what's already out there and move on to the elements that not only your recommendations here, but how to make a better interface between the virtual world and the real world.
So Debbie, why don't you follow?
Yeah, I wanted to speak a little bit to your unlearner, and that is that we've gone from I think we've moved on from all the media and the gadgets and technology being purely entertainment to now being able to be used for engagement and to reaching out and engaging those children. And I know that Connie, the MacArthur Foundation, had funded an incredible project in Chicago where they were able to keep kids out of gangs by using all this incredible technology after school. And it was just phenomenal to see what could happen. And so I see it as a real way to reach those children. There is a school in here, actually from Nashville, called the Curry Ingram Academy that also reaches children. Every child there has had some type of diagnosis, and it's very much into individualized learning plans. And yet again, technology is going to enhance that ability for every child to, for a teacher to be able to learn how that child learns in a very unique way. I was able to go to a 5th grade class in one of the poorest schools in Nashville, and the teacher was showing me that almost on a almost immediate response, he could see how kids were working through different modules and who he needed to send another module, like in math, for instance, to. So I think the opportunities are just endless to reach those kids more than ever before.
So I should just follow up that Debbie really pushed this idea that we're not all great. We all learn differently, and everybody comes at it with different talents to start with. And I think the spirit of the word learner is that everybody has that opportunity.
Yeah.
It may not be the traditional way, and in fact, it not only fosters individualized learning and following the passion and following the interest. And by the way, this is, I think a lot comes from the vision of John Seeley Brown, who was one of the task force members and wrote something called the New Culture of Learning. But that everybody can go somewhere and has something to gain in this new world of learning, and we just have to think of it not as so much as education, but as of learning. And we are all lifelong learners. So the report really focuses on that person and says, how can you pull in, create your own learning network and pull in the resources and find the resources in our pull technology world that is useful to you, and then move forward. It also, by the way, this report is not real regulatory. We're not saying we need to do this rule and this rule. It really actually calls for rethinking some of the regulations that have been overly restrictive in terms of the learning opportunities. But we recognize you cannot. Nobody wants to send their child or themselves be in a place that's not trustworthy, that's not safe. So we are strong at saying we need these safe environments, but we're not trying to legislate in a way. In fact, we say come together and in your own community and figure out what's a safe environment. We give some ideas. One more question briefly, because we are at the end of the hour. So can we get, the mic? Is there a mic? Yeah. And does the mic work? I didn't know if it was working with Diana's question. Very good question.
Hi. Is it working?
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
it is. If I swallow it, it might work.
And identify yourself.
Wendy Drexler, ISTE. I think it's really fabulous that there's a focus on the student and the students in the center. I also love the idea that we need to really incorporate the family into this discussion. As you thought about equity of access, that often makes us think of socioeconomic access. We also think about maybe geographical access, urban versus rural areas and that kind of thing. I really liked, and you touched on this other aspect of equity of access, and that's with the school, and what does the school lock down and what does the school make available as resources. But I would take that one step further, and I wonder if you had any discussion on how this changes the role of teacher, number one, as a facilitator and doing a completely different thing in the classroom, and the whole concept of equity of access in a school where everyone has a device and the school has a philosophy of openness, you still have perhaps an issue with equity of access when you have some teachers who teach in this new way and many teachers who don't. So I'm just curious as to whether that came up as part of the conversation.
That was actually, I would say that was actually the first barrier that we actually had to overcome. We actually had teachers, we had a teacher in the superintendent is part of the task force, and we also had a librarian. And what was interesting was how do we actually start working with teachers so that they become the shepherds of learning, and making sure that they are basically the ones shepherding the individuals and talking about what is safe, what is not online, and how do you actually discern what information is and is not, so that the children themselves can be good stewards of their education. But it was definitely how do we prepare the next generation of teachers and the teachers today so that they're comfortable with that, because it's a very different role and shifting that role of authority from them to the agency of the child.
And the only other comment I make is when we have a lot of different types of conversations about equity and access, but really it's about, in the end, equity of outcomes.
That's right.
So what we want to do is achieve all the same outcomes, same standard, whatever we have to do for the inputs. And I think that's consistent throughout the report, and that's where we really, I think, stand firm as a group.
We also, our superintendent, Wanda, really, I think, kept us honest both in language and tone, that this wasn't, sort of a thou shalt to teachers, but more about sort of casting this as an opportunity. And Neil was great at this as well, sort of casting this as opportunities and talking about this as sort of new roles for teachers. That technology doesn't replace a teacher, it doesn't eliminate the need for teachers. It actually creates new roles for teachers in a lot of different instances. And also, it expands the idea of a teacher. If you think of a connected learning community being, again, teachers in a school being the primary sort of way that a lot of students learn, there are a lot of teachers outside of school with after-school programs, with tutors, with paraprofessionals, with coaches. And the vision we're trying to say here is how do we connect all those different experiences, but also how do we make sure those teachers feel supported and that we're giving them sort of new opportunities to grow in their careers, as well as sort of new opportunities to harness their these technologies for their purposes too.
So to us, the learner is at the center, but the learner often has parents, hopefully has parents. Those are very important. They have teachers, they're very important. And everybody needs to enhance their roles in the learning process. We have 26 action steps that are the beginning, we hope, of more action to put learners at the center, take advantage of our technologies that we have today to make us all learners, not only here in the United States, but worldwide. We urge you to look at the report at aspentaskforce.org, to communicate with us over the next months, years, and let's make it happen. Thank you very much.